The millionaire claimed his wife in front of everyone, and the truth was revealed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Please drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The ballroom fell silent in a way that did not feel natural. Not the polite silence of wealth, but the sharp kind that cuts straight through your chest. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, throwing warm light across marble floors, and designer gowns that cost more than most people's yearly rent. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. Conversations stopped halfway through sentences. At the center of it all stood Alexander Wright, a self-made millionaire whose name carried weight in every room he entered. And beside him stood the woman no one expected him to protect. Her name was Emily Carter. Just seconds earlier, a well-dressed man had stepped far too close to her. His hand reached out, fingers brushing her wrist as if she were something he could claim with confidence and status alone. A careless smile played on his lips, the kind that assumed permission without ever asking. Emily did not scream. She did not make a scene. She simply froze, because moments like this were not new to her. Before the gowns, before the diamond earrings she had borrowed for the night, before the last name Wright was attached to her, Emily had learned a long time ago what it felt like to be powerless in rooms like this. Then Alexander spoke. "Take your hands off my wife." His voice was calm, controlled, but it landed like a thunderclap. The man stepped back instantly, color draining from his face. Around them, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some people stared in shock. Others narrowed their eyes, suddenly desperate to understand what they were witnessing. Emily felt Alexander's hand settle at the small of her back. Not possessive, not performative, steady, protective. And that was when she realized something was different. This was not part of the agreement. Because the truth was, Emily was never supposed to be standing there as his wife in the first place. Only 3 months earlier, she had been counting quarters at her kitchen table, calculating whether she could afford both groceries and the electric bill in the same week. Her apartment was barely 600 square feet, the heater unreliable, the walls thin enough to hear her neighbor's television through the night. Alexander Wright lived in a penthouse overlooking the city skyline, worth more than anything Emily had ever owned combined. Their worlds were never meant to collide. But desperation has a way of rewriting rules. Alexander had needed a wife. Not for love, not for family, for leverage. A critical business merger was hanging by a thread, and the board wanted stability. A married man projected trust, control, permanence. Emily had needed money, enough to keep a roof over her head, enough to stop running. So when Alexander made the offer, he was clear. This was a contract, a role. Nothing more. No love, no feelings, no interference in each other's lives, just signatures on paper. Standing in that ballroom now, with his hands still warm against her back and hundreds of eyes locked onto them, Emily wondered when the lines had started to blur, because the way Alexander looked at her in that moment was not the way a man looked at a contract. And whatever truth was about to be revealed next, nothing was going to be the same again. The silence in the ballroom did not last long, but the tension did. After Alexander led Emily away from the center of the room, the music slowly resumed, and conversations restarted in cautious whispers. Smiles returned to faces, but something had shifted. People were no longer looking at Emily as decoration or curiosity. They were watching her as Alexander Wright's wife. Emily felt it in every step she took. Minutes later, they were inside the back of the black luxury sedan, the city lights sliding past the tinted windows. The door closed with a soft, final click, sealing them into silence. Neither of them spoke at first. Emily stared at her hands resting in her lap. They were steady now, but her chest still felt tight. What had just happened kept replaying in her mind, over and over. "That was not necessary," she finally said, her voice quiet but controlled. Alexander loosened his tie and turned slightly toward her. "It was." "No," Emily replied. "It was not part of the agreement." The word agreement hung between them. 3 months earlier, that agreement had been the only thing holding her life together. She remembered sitting across from Alexander in his glass-walled office, the city spread out beneath them like a map she did not belong on. He had been calm, precise, almost detached. "This is a business arrangement," he had said then. You will be my wife in public settings only. No emotional involvement, no expectations beyond what is written. Emily had nodded, even as her stomach twisted. The money he offered would solve everything. Her rent, her debts, the constant fear of losing the little stability she had left. So she signed. Now, sitting beside him in the car, Emily lifted her eyes to meet his. You crossed a line tonight. Alexander did not answer immediately. He watched the streetlights reflect across the window, his jaw tight. He touched you, he said at last. That happens, Emily replied softly. I can handle myself. I know you can, Alexander said, but tonight you should not have had to. That was not part of the agreement either. The car pulled up in front of the penthouse building, its entrance glowing with warm light and quiet luxury. The doorman opened the door, offering a polite nod as Alexander stepped out, then extended his hand to Emily. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it. Inside the elevator, the silence returned, heavier now. The hum of the ascent filled the space between them. When the doors opened, Emily walked straight toward the guest room she had been assigned since the beginning of their arrangement. She had never crossed the invisible boundary beyond that hallway. Emily, Alexander said. She stopped but did not turn around. The contract, he continued. It exists to protect us, both of us. Emily faced him then, her expression steady but tired. Then do not make promises you do not intend to keep. She disappeared into her room, closing the door quietly behind her. Alone in the living room, Alexander stood still for a long moment. This arrangement had been simple on paper, predictable, controlled. But tonight, in front of everyone, he had not acted out of strategy. And that was the problem, because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. This marriage was supposed to be fake, but the line between role and reality was starting to fade. The next morning, Emily woke before sunrise. The penthouse was quiet, in a way that felt unfamiliar to her. No traffic noise outside the window, no neighbor arguing through thin walls. Just silence, thick and expensive. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, reminding herself where she was and why. This was not her home. This was part of the arrangement. After showering, she dressed carefully, choosing something simple. Not one of the designer dresses prepared for public appearances, but a modest blouse and dark jeans. Clothes that felt like her. When she stepped into the kitchen, Alexander was already there. He stood by the counter, sleeves rolled up, coffee steaming in his hand. Without a suit or tie, he looked less like the man who commanded boardrooms, and more like someone quietly thinking through a problem he could not solve. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," Emily replied, keeping her distance. They moved around the space with practiced politeness, like strangers who had learned each other's habits without learning each other's hearts. Emily poured herself coffee. Alexander reviewed something on his tablet. Finally, he spoke. "We have a family luncheon this afternoon." Emily looked up. "Your family?" "Yes," he said. "My aunt, 2 cousins, a few longtime associates." She nodded slowly. "Public setting." Yes, that was how everything was categorized. Public or private, role or reality. "There will be questions," Alexander added. "You will be expected to answer them." "I always am," Emily said. He paused, then looked at her. "If at any point you feel uncomfortable, we leave." Emily studied his face, searching for calculation. Instead, she saw hesitation. "That was not in the contract," she said. Alexander did not argue. "I know." The luncheon took place at a private country club just outside the city. White tablecloths, quiet laughter, the faint sound of silverware against porcelain. The kind of place where everything appeared perfect on the surface. Emily felt eyes on her the moment they arrived. She smiled when spoken to. She listened more than she talked. When someone asked how she and Alexander met, she answered smoothly, repeating the story they had agreed upon months ago. But then came the test. Alexander's aunt leaned forward, her gaze sharp but curious. "So, Emily," she said, "what do you do when you are not attending events with my nephew?" The table grew quiet. Emily did not look at Alexander for help. "I work," she said simply. "I worked before this marriage, and I plan to work after." The woman raised an eyebrow. "And what kind of work would that be?" Emily took a breath. "The kind that pays bills and teaches humility." A few people smiled politely. Others exchanged glances. Alexander watched closely. Emily continued, her voice steady. "I was not raised in rooms like this. But I believe respect is not measured by income. No one challenged her. Later, as they walked back to the car, Alexander slowed his pace to match hers. "You handled that well," he said. Emily shrugged. "I told the truth, carefully." That evening, they returned to the penthouse in silence once more. But it was not the same silence as before. In the quiet, Emily realized something unsettling. She was no longer pretending to be his wife for them. She was doing it for him. And Alexander, standing alone on the balcony later that night, realized something even more dangerous. For the first time since this arrangement began, he did not want the contract to end, because Emily was no longer just playing the role, and neither was he. The following days settled into a rhythm that neither of them acknowledged out loud. Emily accompanied Alexander to meetings where her presence was expected, but her voice was not. She sat beside him in quiet conference rooms overlooking the city, hands folded neatly, posture perfect. She learned when to smile, when to remain still, when to make brief eye contact that reassured investors without inviting scrutiny. At first, she told herself it was performance, but slowly, something changed. One afternoon, during a strategy meeting at Alexander's headquarters, a senior executive dismissed a concern Emily had raised earlier in private. The man spoke as if she were invisible, brushing past the issue without thought. Emily remained silent. Alexander did not. "That point matters," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And she is right." The room paused. Emily felt every head turn toward her. Alexander continued without hesitation. "If we ignore that risk, we lose leverage within 6 months." No one argued. After the meeting, Emily followed him into the hallway. "You did not have to do that." "I did," he replied. "You saw something I did not." That night, they ate dinner together for the first time without a schedule or obligation. No staff, no formal seating, just 2 plates at the kitchen counter. Emily laughed once, surprising even herself. Alexander looked up. "What?" "I forgot what this feels like," she said, eating without calculating what comes next. He nodded slowly. "So did I." Later, as the city lights flickered below the windows, Emily found herself talking about things she had never planned to share. Her childhood, her mother working double shifts, the constant fear of falling behind, no matter how hard she tried. Alexander listened without interrupting. When he spoke, it was quieter than usual. "I grew up with money but no time. Everything I built after that was about control." Emily met his gaze. "And this marriage?" He hesitated. "It was supposed to be another controlled variable." She did not respond. The shift came the following week. An envelope arrived at the penthouse addressed to Emily. Inside were copies of the marriage contract, highlighted, annotated. A note fell out as she unfolded the pages. "People are starting to ask questions. How long before they realize she is temporary?" Emily sat down slowly, her pulse steady but cold. That evening, she placed the envelope on the counter between them. "It is happening," she said. "Someone is preparing to expose the contract." Alexander scanned the documents, his expression tightening. "I will handle it." "How?" Emily asked. "By rewriting the narrative again?" "This was always a risk," he said, "but it does not change our agreement." She looked at him then, truly looked at him. "It has already changed." Alexander opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he had no immediate answer. Later that night, Emily packed a small bag. Nothing dramatic, just essentials. She paused in the doorway of her room when she heard his voice behind her. "You are leaving." "I am giving you control back," she replied, "before this becomes something you regret." "That is not what I want," he said. "Then what do you want, Alexander?" she asked. Silence, the kind that carries weight. Emily stepped past him, her decision already made. And as the elevator doors closed behind her, Alexander realized the truth far too late. This arrangement had stopped being a contract, and losing her now felt like a failure no amount of money could fix. Alexander did not sleep that night. The penthouse felt larger without Emily there, every room echoing with her absence. He stood by the window long after the city lights dimmed, replaying every moment he had dismissed as insignificant. Every time she had spoken carefully, every time she had chosen dignity over comfort. By morning, the situation had already begun to unravel. His assistant called just after 8. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting this afternoon," she said. "There are questions about your marriage." Alexander closed his eyes briefly. "I will be there." The meeting room was colder than usual, its glass walls offering no privacy from the city beyond. The board members sat in a long line, their expressions polite but guarded. One of them spoke first. "We have received information suggesting your marriage may not be what it appears." Another slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the contract, dates, signatures, clauses. Alexander did not flinch. "This arrangement," the man continued, "could compromise the merger if it becomes public." Alexander leaned back in his chair. "And if it does?" There was a pause. "Then we reassess your position." Alexander understood the message clearly. The marriage that had secured his power could now cost him everything. After the meeting, he did not return to the office. Instead, he drove across the city to the address Emily had once listed on her paperwork. The building was old, brick worn smooth by decades of neglect. Her door opened slowly when he knocked. Emily looked surprised, then guarded. She did not invite him in. "They are moving faster than I expected," he said. "The board has the contract." "I assumed they would," Emily replied calmly. "That is why I left." "This does not have to end like this," Alexander said. Emily shook her head. "It already has. You needed control. I became a liability." "That is not true," he said, his voice firmer now. "You became something I could not categorize." She studied his face. "That is not the same as choosing me." He had no answer that would satisfy her. 2 days later, the charity gala took place as scheduled. Canceling it would have confirmed the rumors. Attendance was mandatory. Emily had planned to stay away, but when she saw the headlines that morning, she changed her mind. Questions about the right marriage surfaced ahead of gala. She arrived alone. The room was brighter than she remembered, louder, sharper. Conversation slowed as she entered, eyes tracking her every step. She felt exposed, but she walked with her head high. Alexander saw her the moment she stepped inside. Relief hit him first, then fear. Before he could reach her, one of the board members intercepted Emily, speaking just loudly enough for others to hear. "So you decided to show up after all," the man said. "Given the circumstances, that is a bold choice." Emily met his gaze. "I do not hide from the truth." "Which truth would that be?" he pressed. The room leaned in. Alexander moved forward, but Emily raised her hand slightly, a silent request. She turned back to the man. "That I never asked for power. I never asked for protection. I asked for respect." Murmurs spread. The man smiled thinly. "And yet you signed a contract." "Yes," Emily said, "because survival is not shameful." Alexander stepped beside her then. The tension tightened. This was the moment everything would break, or finally become real. And for the first time since this all began, Alexander understood that silence would be the greatest betrayal of all. Alexander did not hesitate any longer. He stepped fully in front of Emily, placing himself between her and the board member. His posture was calm, but there was no mistaking the finality in his voice. "That is enough," he said. The room went silent again, heavier than before. He turned slightly, just enough to look at Emily. Not to check her expression, not to ask permission, just to make sure she was steady. Then he faced the crowd. "Yes, there was a contract," Alexander said clearly. "There is no point pretending otherwise." A ripple of shock moved through the guests. "But what you are choosing to ignore," he continued, "is what came after it." The board member frowned. "This is not the time for personal speeches." "It is exactly the time," Alexander replied, "because you are not questioning my business decisions. You are questioning my wife." Emily felt her breath catch. Alexander took her hand. Not tightly, not for display, just enough to ground them both. "I asked Emily to stand beside me when I needed stability," he said. "She agreed when she had nothing to gain except survival. And since then, she has shown more integrity, restraint, and courage than anyone in this room." The murmurs grew louder. "One by one," Alexander went on, "you tested her. You dismissed her. You tried to reduce her to a clause on paper. And still, she showed up. She protected my reputation when it benefited her least." The board member scoffed. "You are emotional. That does not change the facts." Alexander nodded slowly. "You are right. Facts matter." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "This is the contract," he said. "Signed, dated, binding." He looked at Emily again. For weeks, I told myself that this document defined us, that it kept everything safe and contained. Then, without breaking eye contact with the room, Alexander tore the paper in half. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. He tore it again and again until the pages fell uselessly to the floor. This marriage is no longer an agreement, he said. It is a choice. The board member took a step back. You realize what this means? Yes, Alexander said. It means I am willing to risk my position, my merger, my control. He tightened his grip on Emily's hand just slightly. Because I will not allow anyone to treat my wife as disposable. Emily felt something break open inside her. Not fear, not relief, trust. She turned toward him, her voice steady when she spoke. Alexander, you do not owe me this. He met her gaze fully now. I know, that is why it matters. The room buzzed with shock, speculation, disbelief. But Alexander no longer cared. For the first time since this all began, he was not performing. He was not negotiating. He was standing. And as the weight of his decision settled over the room, one truth became impossible to deny. This was no longer a fake marriage. It was a public claim, and nothing would be the same after this. The aftermath came faster than either of them expected. By the next morning, the gala confrontation was everywhere. Business outlets dissected Alexander's decision. Social media split into camps. Some praised his integrity. Others questioned his judgment. The board convened within hours. Alexander sat alone at the long table this time. No advisors, no legal buffer, just the weight of his choice. You acted unilaterally, one director said. You destroyed a binding agreement in public. I ended a lie, Alexander replied calmly. Another leaned forward. You endangered the merger. Alexander nodded. I understand the cost. Silence followed. Finally, the chairwoman spoke. Effective immediately, the merger is suspended. Your position will be reviewed. Alexander did not argue. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out without another word. Across the city, Emily watched the news in a small cafe, her hands wrapped around a mug she had barely touched. She listened to analysts debate motives, ethics, consequences. No one mentioned her name with kindness. When Alexander found her later that day, she was sitting alone in a public park, the late afternoon sun cutting long shadows across the grass. You should not be here, she said quietly when she saw him. I know, he replied, but I needed to tell you myself. He sat beside her, leaving space between them. The board suspended the merger, he said. They may remove me. Emily nodded slowly. I expected that. This is not your fault, he added. She looked at him then. It is not about fault. It is about consequence. They sat in silence, the city moving around them as if nothing had changed. You chose me, Emily said at last. Publicly, without a contract. Yes, and now you are paying for it. Alexander met her gaze. I would make the same choice again. Emily exhaled, her voice steady but firm. That is exactly why I need to walk away. He frowned. Emily, you stood up for me when you did not have to, she continued. You risked everything, and I will not let that become a chain around your future. This is my decision, Alexander said, and this is mine, she replied gently. She stood, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. For the first time, I know your feelings are real. That matters. But love should not require sacrifice that leaves only ruins behind. Alexander rose as well. You think I regret it? No, Emily said. I think you would lose yourself trying to prove you do not. She reached out, placing her hand over his briefly. The contact was light, intentional. Do not follow me, she said. If this is real, let it survive without pressure. Then she turned and walked away. Alexander watched until she disappeared into the crowd. That night, alone in the penthouse, he finally understood the true cost of the contract. Not the money, not the power, but the illusion that control could protect him from loss. And somewhere across the city, Emily felt the same truth settle quietly in her chest. What they had was no longer fake, but it was not yet theirs to keep, not until both of them chose it freely. Weeks passed. The city moved on faster than Alexander expected. The headlines faded. The analysts found new scandals to dissect. The board quietly appointed an interim executive, and the merger dissolved without ceremony. Alexander Wright, once a name spoken with certainty, became a question mark people preferred not to ask out loud. For the first time in years, his calendar was empty. He sold the penthouse, not out of necessity, but intention. The space no longer felt like home. It had been designed for control, not reflection. He moved into a smaller apartment overlooking the river. 800 square feet, no staff, no security detail, just silence and time. Time to think about Emily. He did not try to contact her. He remembered her last words clearly. If this is real, let it survive without pressure. So he let go. Across the city, Emily rebuilt her life quietly. She returned to work, took on extra shifts, found a modest apartment closer to the bus line. It was not easy, but it was hers. No borrowed dresses, no expectations, no watching every word before speaking. Sometimes people recognized her. "Were you married to that billionaire?" they would ask, curiosity sharp but careless. Emily always answered the same way. Once, in a way, and then she changed the subject. One evening, months later, Emily attended a small fundraising dinner for a local housing nonprofit. Nothing glamorous, folding chairs, paper programs. The kind of event where people showed up because they cared, not because they were seen. She almost left when she spotted him. Alexander stood near the back of the room, dressed simply, hands folded, listening as a volunteer spoke about affordable housing shortages. He did not look like the man who once commanded gala ballrooms. He looked grounded. Emily hesitated. Alexander saw her and did not move. He waited. After the presentation ended, Emily approached him on her own terms. "You did not tell me you were coming," she said. "I did not know if you would want to see me," he replied honestly. They stood in the quiet space between rows of empty chairs. "You look different," Emily said. "So do you," Alexander answered. "Stronger." "I am," she said. "I had to be." He nodded. "So did I." They walked outside together, the evening air cool and unhurried. No cameras, no audience. "I did not come here to ask for anything," Alexander said. "I came because this place matters to me now. The work does." Emily studied him carefully. "And what about us?" Alexander took a slow breath. "If you walk away again, I will accept it. No contracts, no claims." She waited. "I am not asking you to be my wife," he continued. "I am asking if you would like to have dinner with me, as yourself, with me, just that." Emily felt something soften inside her. Not urgency, not fear, choice. She smiled slightly. "Dinner sounds reasonable." Alexander returned the smile, quiet and real. For the first time, there was no imbalance to correct, no truth left to reveal, just two people standing on equal ground, choosing what came next. And this time, whatever they built would not be fake, because it would finally belong to both of them. The dinner turned into a habit, not the extravagant kind that required reservations weeks in advance or careful planning, just simple meals. A small Italian place near the river, a quiet diner that stayed open late, places where no one cared who Alexander Wright used to be. They talked slowly at first, about work, about routines, about the strange silence that follows when a life changes direction. Emily spoke about rebuilding stability on her own terms. Alexander listened, not as a man trying to fix something, but as someone finally learning how to stay present. Weeks became months. There were no promises, no labels, no pressure to define what they were rebuilding. Until one evening, as they walked along the river after dinner, Emily stopped. "You know," she said softly, "this feels different." Alexander nodded. "It is. There is no contract holding this together," she continued, "no obligation." "I know," he said. "That is why I am here." Emily turned to face him, the city lights reflecting in the water behind them. "If this ends, it ends because we choose it, not because something breaks." Alexander met her gaze. "That is the only way I want it." He reached into his jacket, then stopped. Emily raised an eyebrow. "You look nervous." He smiled faintly. "I am." He took a breath and reached into his pocket again, pulling out a small velvet box. He did not kneel. He did not make a speech. He simply held it out. "This is not a proposal built on fear or convenience," he said. "There is no audience, no leverage, no expectations." He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, elegant, unassuming. "I am not asking you to save me," Alexander continued. "I am asking if you would choose me, freely, as your equal." Emily felt tears rise, but she did not rush them away. She thought of the contract she once signed out of desperation, the moment he tore it apart in front of everyone, the weeks she spent learning how to stand on her own again, and the man standing in front of her now. "I already did," she said quietly. She reached out, closing the box gently and placing it back in his hand. Then she took the ring herself and slipped it onto her finger. Alexander exhaled, emotion finally breaking through his careful control. They did not announce the engagement publicly. There was no press release, no exclusive interview. When they married, it was in a small ceremony by the river. A handful of friends, no board members, no contracts to sign except the one that mattered. As Emily stood beside Alexander, she realized something that had taken her a long time to learn. Power does not come from being claimed. It comes from being chosen. And as Alexander looked at Emily, he understood the truth he had been avoiding his entire life. Love is not a negotiation. It is not a performance. It is a decision you make when no one is watching. And this time, everything was real.